So, willkommen zurück.
Okay, welcome back. I've invited myself a guest who will be announcing the next speaker. Do you want to come to the front here?
Hallo, ich bin Lara Schiele.
Hello, I'm Lara Schiele, I'm 10 years old and I'm from Hamburg. The next presentation will be by Nancy on person-centered future planning.
Take this one. Yeah, just.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful, Lara. I wanted to tell you who I am if you have not met me before. I have a son with Charge syndrome who is 33 years old. And I'm discovering as I sit in the consultations that I have a lot of information from my experience that can help other parents. And I think a lot about the things I wish I knew when my son was born. And I wish I could go tell myself those things now. So I am also a psychology professor at a community college, so I teach introductory psychology, lifespan development, things like that. I have a lot of children, including my husband that you heard speak a minute ago. All of the kids are boys. You see in the picture all the boys we have. And this is my son Jacob holding the bananas there. I really am an advocate for people with disabilities, especially to be a part of their own home community in as much as they can. I don't agree with having people being put into institutions and not having choices and things like that. So I've always been a very strong advocate for even people with the most severe disabilities to have choices in their life. And so this is what I'm going to talk about today. But first and foremost, I'm Jacob's mother. Let's see, I'll do this next. There we go. So I'm a school psychologist also. So I am the person who works in the schools in the United States, and I do assessments on children and testing to see if they have disabilities. Most of the assessments are things like, does my child have a learning disability in reading? Do they need some support from a reading specialist? But sometimes I would get a student with more severe disabilities. And in that case, instead of saying, yes, this child has disabilities, it would be more about what recommendations I could make for the child to have a better education. So I want to tell you that this is the traditional way to plan for supports, at least in the US. In the school, testing is done, they make recommendations. The school sort of gets to decide what are the best recommendations, and it's based on what they can offer versus giving the recommendations that might be best for the child. So this is what traditional assessment in the school gives you. We use what are called standardized tests, which are tests that we give to all the children for any disability, like an intelligence test. And then we compare the children with each other to see how well they do. I don't know if this is your experience, but each team member does their own assessment. So we have the physiotherapist doing the assessment of physical things, and we have the educational specialist doing the assessment of educational things, and we have the speech and language therapist doing their bit, and then everyone comes together. The parent may or may not have good input. Some school districts in the United States are really good about listening to parents, others are not so much, and maybe you've had some experience with teachers and educators of both kinds. It looks primarily at academic skills. So if I'm working with a child with a disability, it's all about how can we help them learn more math and reading and, maybe some social skills too, but it's not about life skills so much. So the goals and objectives we come up with then are mostly for what's going to happen in the schools. What do you think is wrong with this model? Anybody have any ideas? Does it leave out anything important?
Nothing to do with real life at home somewhere else.
It has very little to do with real life at home or in the community, exactly. So we can make a program for your child for 6 hours every day, but what happens for the other 18 hours? So we say for most people with sensory impairments, it's not going to work well. If they have medical issues, if they have communication problems, the general school is not well equipped to work with our kids. It's really important that we see the whole child. What can we do? How can we see the whole child and not put them into boxes with labels on them? My child is deafblind, my child has autism, my child, is this and this and this. No, my child is Jacob, and he has Jacob's syndrome. So in order to do this, it takes a whole village. That's a statement we say. I think Hillary Clinton was the first one to say it in the US. It takes a village to raise a child. The whole community needs to get involved in order to support our children if possible. So here's what this comic says: severely dysfunctional team. So there's the physiotherapist takes the legs, and the teacher takes the brain, and the occupational therapist, I don't know what you call that here, takes the arms, right? And nobody sees the whole child. Do you have those experiences with doctors? Yeah. Wouldn't it be wonderful if the doctors worked together as a team and actually listened to us? Yeah. I've been doing this for 33 years and I'm very tired. So we need the whole team to get the whole picture. And this has to include the individual person and what they want. We shouldn't be just talking about them without their own input. Even really young children you can understand what they like and don't like, right? Let's see, this is an American idiom. Who wears the pants in this family? I don't know if you've heard that, but who's the boss, right? So this says someone in the family should be making the biggest decisions rather than the school people. So I'm going to talk about an approach to assessment called person-centered planning. Has anybody heard of this before? Yes? Okay. Is it done here? Okay, good. I want to talk about the changes that have happened in the U.S. around disability and how person-centered planning is a very positive approach that's centered around the individual and their family and what they want. So person-centered planning is a series of approaches that helps change the person's life and guiding the community to change around the person to get them what they need in alliance with the people. So it's not a lot of professionals doing this for your child or to your child, but with you and with your child. The emphasis is changing the environment, not the person. So the goals don't end up being Jacob will read 60 words by the end of this year, or Jacob will use sign language when he needs to go to the bathroom. The goals and objectives are, what can we do to the environment to make it easier for Jacob to communicate and learn? Okay, just a tiny bit of history. During, I'm going to skip over because I have a lot of slides, but you can read it yourself. Historically, people with disabilities, maybe you all know this, have been seen as less than human, been seen as monsters, people to make fun of, demons, right? In the Bible, often demons. People who need charity, we should feel sorry for them. Sometimes they're seen as they're going to be a child forever, and they're very, very innocent. So we've gone back and forth in history between seeing people with disabilities as demons and people who should be locked away, or seeing them as little angel children who need to be taken care of and loved. And we seem to go back and forth in history on this. So in order to see a person individually, Wolf Wolfensberger said way back in 1969, and not that much has changed since 1969, at least in the US, that we need to see people as people. They are a person, they're not a child. They're a citizen of the world, and they have potential. So has any of you individuals with charge or your families ever had somebody say, you will never be able to do that, or your child will never be able to do that? Wouldn't it be wonderful if somebody said, hope for the best, keep trying, you can do it. I mean, isn't that what we tell everyone else? What we tell our other children? So, one of the reasons we do person-centered planning is because it's really important that individuals with disabilities don't get defined by stereotypes, don't get put into boxes with labels, but get seen as individuals themselves first. All individuals have strengths and talents and skills that can be shared in the community. And I'll explain more about that. Even the person with the most severe disabilities can do something to enhance their community. And having meaningful relationships is important to everyone's well-being, right? What happens when you're lonely? We evolved to be social creatures. If you were not social with your group, you wouldn't survive. If you didn't contribute to the community, you couldn't survive back in the cave person days, right? In evolutionary days, if you didn't cooperate, you got kicked out and you died. And we know that you really need to have people around you to survive in the elements. So it's important for everyone, even people with disabilities, to have important relationships. Here are some basic principles of person-centered planning and values. As I said, everyone has strengths and contributions. Everyone has hopes, dreams, and desires. When you go to your school meeting, do they ask you, what do you dream for your child? What do you hope will happen? Or do they just write a prescription and say, this is what we will do, and these are the problems your kid has? Deficits, these are the problems. Each person should have the primary authority over their own life. Everyone should get to decide what they do in their life. Every single person, deaf, blind, charge, any disability, has the ability and the right to make choices and decisions. I've seen so many classrooms with people with severe disabilities where they're just told what to do all day long. Never any choice built in. How would it make you feel if you had no choices in your life? People who live in institutions and group homes, and even in homes where they have a roommate in the United States, they don't get to choose their roommate. The agency will put two people together that think should live together. So I had a friend named Susie who has since passed away. She had Down syndrome, and she was put together with a man, and he raped her. He said he was her husband. It was awful, and she did not like being with him, but they kept them together because that was how the system did things. Okay, goals of person-centered planning. Everyone should be present and participate in community life. So this moves into kind of inclusive community, inclusive schools. Person-centered planning is meant to lead to people being a part of their community and not being segregated. Gaining and maintaining satisfying relationships. A lot of people with disabilities don't have friends. They will have lots of caregivers, lots of medical providers, but how many of them have actual friends? Expressing preferences, making choices, continuing to develop personal competencies. Do we all continue to learn as adults? I started doing pottery 5 years ago, and now I'm selling my pottery. I'm a psychology professor, but I needed to learn something new. I wanted to improve my skills in something else. How many of you picked up a new hobby or, learned a new instrument or something? Maybe you're still too busy raising children. My kids are all out of the house, so I can do that now. But most people kind of like to keep learning throughout their lifetime. And then fulfilling respected roles and living with dignity. In my town, in my small town in Michigan in the US, People with disabilities are often given jobs on crews. They're called crews. And all the people with disabilities will go in a van and go pick up trash somewhere all together. So their choices aren't taken into consideration. It's what the agency has for them to do. They go out, they all pick up trash. It's not a really dignified job. I'm not saying anything against people who choose to have trash collection as their career. But if you're not given a choice, maybe you'd like to do something different than that. And maybe you'd like to do it in your natural community instead of with a whole bunch of other people with disabilities. Okay. So we want to build a community life in 4 directions. We want to encourage friendships. This is the goal of what we're doing in our planning. We want to strengthen associational life, which means become a part of groups. Okay, so when you join a group, that's usually where you end up getting friends. Think about where you met your best friend or your spouse or your boyfriend, girlfriend. Where did you meet? Unless you're using Tinder or something like that on the internet, typically you met them in a group that you were in. Maybe you went to school together, maybe you worked at a similar job, maybe you are on a bowling league together, something like that, right? So usually getting into groups helps you become friends with others. So getting people with significant disabilities or any disabilities, everyone needs to belong to some kinds of groups, and then they'll have more friendships. Build school, work, and homemaker roles. Oops, I skipped one. School, work, and homemaker roles. So this is my son Jacob with one of his caregivers, and this is him at home. He has jobs in the community, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. He also lives in his own home and has to take care of it. So here they are helping him do the dishes. And he can become independent at quite a few of these things if his balance issues allow him to do it. And finally, encourage neighborhood connections. Does your child have the ability, even as an adult, to be neighborly with others? Jacob goes grocery shopping once a week. He goes to the farmer's market downtown to buy fresh produce. People see him, people know him. The neighbors know him because he loves to lie on a blanket in the sun in his own front yard. And he's so tan. I'm worried he's going to get skin cancer because his face is so dark. So people know him. He goes places and people say hello to him all the time. And half of the time, whoever's with him has no idea who is talking to him. But that's okay. It doesn't matter that much. Okay, so we're going to talk about a person-centered planning process called MAPS. There are several, but the one we're going to talk about is MAPS. First, you start by discussing with the person and or their family what their goals are, for what their actual, what is it you want out of life? What kinds of things do you want to talk about at your meeting? So the agenda is up to them. And is there anything you don't want to talk about at your meeting? You know, who do you want to have at your meeting and who don't you want to have at your meeting? Think about yourself as an individual, the parents in here. If you were to have a meeting with all the people that love and cared about you giving input into your life, can you think of a mother-in-law or a sister that you don't want there? I know there are certain members of my family I don't want there. So the individual, and is there a teacher you wouldn't want there for your child, or a therapist? Because you know they're going to gum up the works and make it more difficult. Sometimes these meetings can turn those people around. It's really interesting how it happens. If you have a good facilitator who knows how to take the input from people and turn it around into a very positive thing or question it, people tend to get on board, which is a really nice way of doing it. So this is an invitation I put out to people to do a MAPS meeting for Jacob. And it says, please come and help unlock the doors into my exciting future. And it says, you're invited because you know me in a way that no one else knows me. And I want you there. Bring an open and creative mind and a loving heart, and your appetite will eat. So person-centered plans are very loose. They're not formal. You have pizza and snacks, and typically when I'm facilitating them, I will put, we call them fidgets around the table, so little things to play with, Play-Doh and, little Lego things, so that people can fidget while they're talking. And do you understand what I'm saying when I say fidgets? Okay. So it's very loose. People are allowed to get up and walk out, come back when they're ready. It's very, very loose. It's almost like a party. It's a celebration. So here, I skipped over this. Who would you want at your meeting? So the meeting is so different because it's not just school providers or medical providers, but all of your friends are there too, and your family. So who would you want at your meeting to help you plan? Say you had something like I know someone who had a person-centered planning meeting who had just recently had a cancer diagnosis, and she invited all of her friends to help her deal with the emotions of it, help to plan for her future, things like that. And just having all those loving people there talking about what are very personal issues to you can be daunting. It can be very difficult. But we have people in school meetings all the time, and we talk to them and at them and tell them, all the things that are wrong with them. And it must be a horrible feeling for the individual to have that happening right in front of them. So person-centered planning is a group brainstorming process. You typically need to have a skilled facilitator. So you find someone who's done it before, who will come and talk to you ahead of time about the issues, who knows how to bring together all the people and communicate well with them. Everyone has an equal voice, but the person has the loudest voice. So if you hold it in a place that's neutral, I would never hold a person-centered plan in the school. When you're in the school and you're having a school meeting, the school people have more power, right? And you want everyone at this meeting to have equal power. So we might hold our person-centered plan at a community, at a church somewhere, right? So everyone coming in, nobody owns the place. We are all equal around the table, except for my son and my family. We are more equal than everyone else. We have the most input. So it's fun and relaxed, but it's also very respectful and serious. You have ground rules, like everyone gets to say anything they want because it's brainstorming. No dream is too big or too small. Let's skip over. So the first step we do in person-centered planning is we talk about the person's history, because you want to bring everyone together in the room and make sure everybody's on the same page. So often, think about your school people again. Do they know your child's medical history the way you know it? You go in there and they see your child as one thing, but you have all this history of all the physical therapy they've had and all the medical therapies they've had and all the struggles you've had and everything that you've had with your child before they started school. But the school people only see the legs or the brain or the hands, right? They don't know that history. So when you have person-centered plan, you go through the entire history of your child briefly, and you talk about all the things that have been the highlights in their lives and how everybody's been present to the history. So here's an example of a history we did with Jacob at age 15. So we talk about he was born 8 weeks premature in Kansas before we moved to Michigan. He had a diagnosis of Charge syndrome. He had early intervention services in Michigan at 3 months old. And then when he was 2.5, 2 of his siblings died in a car accident. Most of his school people had no idea that that was a part of our lives. And how did that affect our care of him? The grief process made it very, very difficult. He was the only child we had in the home. He was completely deaf and very quiet. Life really changed for us. He started in a severe classroom, segregated classroom at age 2.5. And then I went to conferences and learned about inclusive education. And I started getting on the bandwagon to advocate for him. He started regular first year of school, which is what we call kindergarten. It's different from what you called kindergarten here. At 5 years old, he was in a general education classroom, not segregated. And then his brother was adopted, which is a big event in his life. He started walking at age 7. That's really late for charge, but it was a very exciting thing for him. He had another brother born in 1997, got a cochlear implant at age 13. So these are all the things that had led up to his, these people knew none of this. And it enhances the empathy for Jacob's life and everything the family has been through, and it kind of gets them to feel where you're coming from when you're asking for things. So the next thing you do is you talk about dreams. What are the person's dreams, and what are your dreams for them? So we use large pieces of paper on the wall, or at Perkins School for the Blind, they actually have a whole wall that you can draw on, which is really nice, and it just washes off. And you just write down all the dreams, everything everybody says. What are your dreams for Jacob? What are your dreams for Jacob? What are your dreams for your child? What do we think Jacob's dreams are for himself? What does he wish for? Okay? And it's very open-ended, and it can go on a while. And after it's done, you can revisit it if someone comes up with another dream. But again, it's a brainstorming process. So you start with these very broad ideas, and towards the end, you narrow it down and narrow it down. So here are Jacob's dreams at that same age. People in his life that he likes and that know about charge. Visit a beach regularly. Live independent of his parents and be comfortable. Have a vibrating chair. Not be alone. Find a way to unlock his potential. A home in his parents' neighborhood that's cool, safe, and fun. And then his occupational therapist said, eat, chew, and enjoy food, which he still doesn't chew. So have an ability to communicate pain and other needs. One of the major things we have with Jacob, I know you just heard Tim talk about a lot of this stuff, but is that when he's in pain, we don't know what's bothering him. And over the years, we've learned that certain behaviors mean certain things. So when he sticks things in his neck like this, it usually means ear infection. When he blows, it usually means something's going on with his belly. And we've kind of learned just through that behavior to figure out what he's... So we kind of have met that in a way. But if he has some other kind of pain, like tooth pain or a headache, we don't have any way of knowing what it is. Give him Tylenol. Lots of doctor's visits. How many of you is that familiar to? Have a social life outside of his family. Be independent in the bathroom. This is an important one because research shows that the more independent a person with disabilities can be in the bathroom, the less likely they are to be sexually abused by a caregiver. Have meaningful daily activities. So we have a lot of individuals that, again, are in a group home, or they go to what we call a sheltered workshop. So in Mount Pleasant, where I live, there's a sheltered workshop. All the people with disabilities get bused there daily. They do kind of meaningless work all day, and then they get bused home, and they get paid 7 cents an hour. And it's kind of used as a daycare for them, so that the people where they live don't have to take care of them during the day. I did not want that for Jacob. If Jacob's going to do work, I want it to be work that means something to him, that he likes doing. Here's the dreams of a young man I worked with at Perkins, who also had charge. You can see in here he really loves trees. He wants to work with trees. Help at a camp for children with disabilities. Learn martial arts. These are things that he actually wanted, and he could communicate that. So you can see if he can tell me he loves those things, how can we find a job that will work for him in those areas? Isn't that what we all want to do? We want to work in the area that interests us, right? So instead of having to work picking up trash somewhere because he lives in an institution, we got to work on finding jobs that he would love. Here's a very young girl named Kara who also had charge, and the dreams for her from the very beginning, she was age 4. Eat normally, be independent, be healthy, communicate, have friends. These are all things we want for all of our children at age 4, right? Where if this had been a school meeting, it would have said very different things. Okay, the next thing we go to is called fears or nightmares. So we put the dreams on the wall where everybody can see them, and then we talk about what are our fears or nightmares for this person. Jacob's had person-centered plans since he was 5 years old. When he was 5 years old in school, we had a lot of children come to his person-centered plan, children from his inclusive classroom. And they had just done a study on fire safety. So when we asked them what their fears or nightmares were for Jacob, a lot of them said, get caught in a fire, not be able to get out of their house in a fire, because that was on their mind. But they were really thinking about what would be scary, because what's scary for a typical 5-year-old would be scary for an atypical 5-year-old too. And that's one of the reasons why when you have person-centered planning, it's important to have your peers there. If we had just had that with adults, we wouldn't have heard all the things that typical 5-year-olds dream of or are afraid of. We would have just had kind of an adult perspective, so it was important. Fears and nightmares are, skip this one. Fears and nightmares are barriers to realizing your dreams. These are things that are in the way of meeting your dreams. They may be very uncomfortable. We try not to spend too much time on it, especially parents can get very emotional about these things. And then we try to think about how they can be avoided. So here are the fears that we came up with for Jacob at age 17, I believe it was. No one to look after him when his parents die. So you all met Tim, he's 73, right? What happens when he and I are gone? Who will take care of him? We're still working on that. We think we're getting somewhere. He has 4 brothers who are old enough to help take over. Some are interested, some are less interested, and we hope we have a plan that works. Communication misperceived as behaviors. I'm sure you're going to hear a lot about that this weekend. But I've seen as a school psychologist, a lot of kids be punished for trying to communicate. A boy was communicating that he wanted to go home and was trying to go out the door with his backpack, and the staff escalated his behavior by telling him no, 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 yelling at him, and eventually they ended up with him on the ground, and they were restraining him. It was horrific. This stuff still happens. If they had just listened to him and said, oh, you want to go home? We'll go home in a little while. Just like you would say to a toddler, right? Or any child. Give an opportunity to explain it. Tell them what's going to happen next. But we never wanted that for Jacob. Maybe his message wouldn't be understood when he's in pain. Institutional living and working. We've talked about this. You can see a lot of these are the opposites of what his dreams are. Lack of meaningful activities instead of having meaningful activities. Here's another example. This is a young man at Perkins named John. They wanted him to be accepted and then not be alone, not be understood, seriously injure himself or others. He'd not have him underestimate himself. So again, these are scary things, but they help with the planning, because when you get to the real planning stages, you try to talk about how can we meet this person's dreams and avoid the nightmares. So everybody has all that information, it's put on the wall, and then you move to the next step. The next step is to ask, who is this person? And this is a way of describing this person as an individual and not a disability. What are their strengths? What are their skills? What are their likes and dislikes? What kinds of things do they like to do? When I do this, I use a format that looks like this. I put the person's name in the middle, and I say, everybody throw out 1 or 2 word phrases that describe this person. And they don't always have to be positive, but we try to make this sort of a playful, fun thing. So this little girl, Kara, is a super licker. Even though she had no formal communication, someone said she is a communicator. She lets you know when she doesn't like something. She's determined, as are a lot of individuals with charge. They really know what they want a lot of times. Self-advocate, stubborn, very huggy, has strong opinions. So we try to, how does this describe the person differently than the psychological educational evaluation they've had that says, this person can read at the 2nd grade level, or this person has these behaviors, right? You're describing this as an individual person. Okay. Sometimes you can do a map called likes and dislikes, or gifts, strengths, and talents. So John from before has a really good memory, loves to write. He's very determined and persistent. You can see it's a similar kind of thing, but it really puts a positive feeling into the whole planning system. It's all about, we want to help this wonderful person have a wonderful life. Okay. After we do who is this person, we're going to move to something called needs. So looking at the dreams and avoiding the nightmares and thinking about this person's strengths and who they are, what do we think they need? The focus is positive, and we use brainstorming. So here's a map of Jacob's needs. Jacob needs social relationships, friendships, and natural supports. So the term natural supports means people in his life that aren't paid to be there. Because a lot of times for people with severe disabilities, everyone who's in their life is paid to be there, right? And that would be a really empty life, right, if you didn't have friends. Communication and people who understand his communication. Work, recreation that fits him. What kinds of things does he like to do and like to work at? He needs a home life. So we had decided way back when he was 5 years old that I had put in his dreams in his first person centered plan that I wanted him to live in his own place and not be in an institution at all. And Tim will tell you that he rolled his eyes. He thought I was crazy. But because we started thinking about that at 5 years old, Jacob now lives in his own home with 24-hour support. And that wouldn't have happened if we hadn't thought about it and dreamed about it since he was a young child. And in his life, in his home, he has a hot tub, he has a vibrating chair, he has sensory toys, lava lamps, and a swing, and all those things. Health and safety is one we all think about, right? It's your fear that your child, if they have severe disabilities, is going to wander off, is going to get lost, somebody's going to, do something to hurt them. It's the scariest thing ever as a parent. I mean, I think we worry about that with all of our children. 24/7 care, which he now has. Meaningful and appropriate adult services. And finally, not just accept him, but we want people to embrace him, embrace his uniqueness, and see what a cool person he is. All right. And finally, we come to an action plan. The action plan looks at how can we move towards the dream while avoiding the nightmares. And it becomes very concrete. We talk about, okay, these are the needs. How are we going to meet this need? How are we going to meet this need? This group right here, how can we brainstorm how to meet this need? How can we brainstorm how to have Jacob have work that is meaningful to him? And then someone might say, well, he really likes water. I could take him to the Children's Museum, and he could maybe work to help clean the toys in the water table that the children play with. It's something to try, right? See if he likes that. Or someone from the school may say, well, Jacob likes animals. Why don't I take him to the animal shelter and see if we can find something for him to do there? Find something that he will like doing that's based on his interests versus just putting him into an existing program. Because he should have the right to determine what he does for work, just like the rest of us are able to. Sometimes we say, what would a perfect day be like for this person? When Jacob was in school, it would say, Jacob gets on the bus with the children without disabilities. He plays on the playground before school. He goes into the general education classroom. He learns what he needs to learn alongside his peers. He goes to music and physical education and art with his peers. The perfect school day would be him being with his community, but also getting his educational needs met at the same time. For instance, when he went to physical education, the physical therapist scheduled to do his therapy in there. One of the things they were working on, because he has the curvature of his back, is getting him to stretch up and reach things. So the boys, or the children in the classroom, were playing basketball. It was perfect, getting him to stretch up and hold the ball like this, and then the other children would help him tip it in. It was wonderful. It was inclusive. He got to learn what he needed to learn. He had friends around him who supported him. So the action plan is also, you look at what, who, and by when. So it looks like this, typically. It's not brainstorming anymore. It's much more concrete. But you're taking all the brainstorming ideas. Who is this person? All their unique qualities, gifts, strengths, talents, their dreams, and trying to avoid the nightmares and make them have a life that is meaningful versus a life where they're just taken care of and housed somewhere. So we would have people in the person-centered plan actually volunteer to help with certain things or work with agencies to find those things that would happen. And finally, we have a by when. So this isn't one of those meetings where you fill out the paperwork and then it goes in a file and you never look at it again. We get those all the time, right? This is a meeting where you say, in 8 weeks, I will have done this. And you all come back together and say, how did it go? I mean, does it sound more meaningful than the typical school meetings? It's such a wonderful process, and it changes people's lives. So you revisit it, and you look at it as if they are goals and objectives, but you're not changing the individual, you're changing their environment. So we had an action plan for, let me see. Which one was it? I don't have it in here. We had an action plan for a young man at Perkins School for the Blind who he just loved to sing. And he sang all during his person-centered plan. And there was a young man who worked in the Perkins Lunch Cafe where the teachers would come to kind of have a lunch lounge. And this young man played the piano during that. That was one of his skills. And he was a visually impaired young man, and he played the piano all during the lunch cafe. And so someone suggested, well, why don't we have this young man sing with him while he's playing the piano? They could rehearse together. They could possibly become friends. They can provide this service together. People will appreciate it. And it gives him an outlet for his singing, and it becomes a job for him. So the action plan was that so-and-so would talk to the other boy, and so-and-so would talk to the teacher, and then they'd give it a try and see what happened, and then you revisit. There we go, outcomes. So these are some outcomes for the children. I have all the maps for there. The outcomes were that Jay and his brother, part of their dreams were to spend more time together. They both had charge, but they didn't really connect at home. To trying to get them to spend more time together at school, lifting weights, because they both love lifting weights. And so their physical therapist was going to take them in a weight room and have them lift weights together and communicate together and become closer. Outcomes for Jacob. Is that the right one? No? There. Yeah, that's the right one. Outcomes for Jacob. Jacob has had person-centered plans throughout his life, beginning at age 5. He's now 33. He lives in his own home. He has 24/7, 24-hour-a-day assistance to take part in all aspects of his life. He has 3 individualized part-time jobs. 2 of them he lost during COVID, which was really sad. He had a job working at a diner called the Pixie, And at the diner, he would go in 3 times a week and wash the laminated menus. He'd take them all independently, take them all off of the tables, sit down, wash them, put them back on the tables, and then take his iPad to the counter and say, "I'd like a strawberry shake, please." And they'd give it, that was his payment, because he doesn't care about money, and he doesn't need to have a paycheck from that. But during COVID, they got rid of their laminated menus. So this job that he had done for 10 years just went away. So he had a job also where he was making dog biscuits and selling them at our local pharmacy. And all of the money he would donate to the Charge Syndrome Foundation to help families. And then he also returned bottles and cans. In Michigan, which is one of the only states that does this in the United States, every time you return a bottle or a can, you get 10 cents. So he would, and people don't like to throw them away because it feels like you're throwing away money, but people also don't want to take them back. So he had several people who would donate their cans to him. Every day he takes cans and bottles still, gets the money, independently puts them in the machine, pulls out the receipt, takes it to the counter, gets the cash, puts it in his cash box. And every 2 years when we go to the Charge conference, he hands them a $500 check, all from those cans. So he doesn't keep the money. People realize where the money's going. But it gives him something to do in the community. He's contributing to the Charge community. People know him when he goes to the store to return cans. I'm not sure he enjoys it, but it's become so routine for him that he will do it. It's hard to find things he enjoys. We just found him a new job. And we have like I said, the Children's Museum. And one of the new jobs, they have a light room now that they didn't used to have. It's like a large light board across one wall and it has all these clear plastic colored blocks that you can put into the little holes for children to look at. He loves those things. So his new job is he goes over there, he takes them all out, puts them in a bucket, goes into another little room, washes them, dries them, and then he gets to put them back in the light, and he just loves that. And he gets to do it 3 times a week. So it's a job. He gets to do that, and he gets to return his cans every day. He's got work, and he's got work that is meaningful to him. He lives in a home where things are not demanded of him on a specific schedule. We use schedules and calendars and all the deafblind systems. But if he's not feeling good, he doesn't have to go to work if he's having a rough day, right? Because even as an adult, he has difficulty with, his bowels and things like that and has days of pain. So it's very flexible for him. And if he's not hungry at noon, he doesn't have to eat. He can eat lunch at 3 o'clock. That's what I do. Why shouldn't he be able to also? He's an adult. He should be able to choose when he eats, make a choice of what he eats, choose how late he stays up at night, choose when he wakes up as long as it fits with his work schedule. He has responsibilities in the home, but the rest of his day he chooses. Isn't that what we all do? Or we would like to. I mean, if we're not raising children, we don't necessarily choose, but I want him to have this life that is enviable. I want people to look at him and say, I wish I had that kind of life, where I had those kinds of choices. We had a plumber come in and fix something for him the other day, and the plumber came in and said, his house is so clean. And I said, that's because every day the workers cleans a different thing, so it stays clean for him. He has a hot tub in an enclosed room he goes into every day. He just loves it. I don't know what it is about water. Maybe it has to do with the balance disorder, but just getting the weight off your bones. I don't know, but he just loves it. Okay, so things to remember if you're going to do a person-centered plan are to find a skilled facilitator. Are there facilitators here in this country? A few. It's difficult even in the U.S. to find someone who really does it well. I get asked a lot to do it, and other people who weren't really, it's kind of like school meetings used to be supposed to be very well done, but now it's all become mechanized, you know what I mean, with the paperwork, and people just check the boxes instead of really thinking out of the box. So finding a skilled facilitator, or learn how to do it yourself. That's what I did. I do it for Jacob, I do it for other people. Keep the person at the front and center. Make sure it's always about the individual first and not about what the school has available or what they need. I was facilitating a person-centered plan for one of these individuals, and the administrator of Perkins told me that the local school district who pays for the child to be living at Perkins and going to school there, the local school district was not going to provide a certain thing after school for the child. The local school district administrator came to the person-centered plan and agreed to do it because they saw that the need was there. And it made sense to them once it was explained in such a way they could understand. And they did it, they paid for it. So it brings people together, and it brings people on, it makes everybody understand the issues together. It provides a lot of support for families. I will say that a lot of times for Jacobs, the action plans had my name on them. You know, just like everything else in charge, right? We don't have doctors that no charge. We don't have teachers that no charge. It's up to us to keep doing the work, and it's exhausting. And I think Tim's talking about that tomorrow. Or did he do that today? Talk about parenting tomorrow. Yeah. But we keep doing it because we love them, right? Collaborate with other families to find out. Collaborate with the family if you're a facilitator to find out what's best for the person. If you're a facilitator, you meet with the family ahead of time and you find out what it is they want to come out of the plan. Because if you're the facilitator, you can sort of, we would use the word massage the plan in the direction that the family wants it to go in very subtle ways if you're good at it. So this was a training I did for school teachers. But what I said to them is that wallpaper and markers can open the doors to a new world. It's often hard to find vision in what we call the human service world, the agencies. People are entrenched in their jobs. People are bored. People are burned out. The person whose life is being focused on should have the loudest voice. You have to have a personal relationship with the person in order to come to the meeting. And this is the only meeting I've ever been to that really felt worth it. You know, at work, I have so many meetings, and they're all Zoom now, of course, right? Just like another meeting, you know, nobody's saying anything worthwhile. That same person always brings up that same issue. I'm so bored with it, right? But at this meeting, it's all important. It's all about hope and dreams and making someone's life better. It's just an amazing meeting, and people leave and they're just energized. Person-centered planning is a celebration of life. This is what they often look like when you're finished. You use markers, you use, especially for people who maybe don't have good literacy skills, you draw pictures. You have pictures of, I might have drawn a picture of that young man playing the piano or singing, things like that. You try to make it graphic, and it makes it more fun. People really enjoy seeing that as well. And then finally, some references there. I have a few of these slides, like the 4 ways to enhance life and things like that came from this manual on person-centered planning. So I know it's very hot, but we do have time for questions, if you have any, because this is supposed to go another half hour, and I tried to kind of zip through it so we'd have time. Yes. Oh, I need to get my...
No, yeah.
I forget, I won't understand.
Ja. Macht dies in Deutsch? Ja, bitte.
Wie bringen Sie all die Leute dazu?
How do you get all of those people to come? I mean, they're not paid to attend. The teachers and all the specialists who are so busy as they are in their jobs and are doing so much extra work. Therapists, okay, maybe they can charge for it. But yeah, how do you get them to actually come? That's probably the first hurdle to overcome.
It really is. That's an excellent question. For Jacob, it was not always possible to get them to come. But as long as you have at least one stakeholder, one person who holds the purse strings, I'm using a lot of idioms, somebody who controls money can make a big difference, or an administrator who will come. A lot of times it takes kind of an institutional buy-in. So at Perkins required this training. Perkins School for the Blind is now doing person-centered plans on site for every child who's blind or deafblind at age 14, 17, and 21. And I feel very good about that because I feel like I trained them and I made a difference in a lot of people's lives. It's probably one of the best things I've ever done in my career. But yeah, for Jacob, sometimes the teacher would come. Oftentimes his speech therapist would come. She really cared about him and believed in the process. But it was very difficult. And often Tim and I will talk about, Jacob has this wonderful life and Jacob did it wasn't easy. It always sounds like this wonderful thing, but I do a lot of work behind the scenes. So like I said, sometimes they came, sometimes they didn't. And often the things that happened for Jacob were things that got assigned to me. But if you have agencies that really, if you can get them to understand the process and contribute to it, it can make huge differences in the services. We've always really fought for inclusive services for Jacob. He was diagnosed in 1989. It's been a long time before anyone knew about CHARGE. So we've had to teach about CHARGE, deafblindness, inclusive education, fight. We've even gone to court over them taking away his nighttime care. We ended up in federal court, which is it's right before the Supreme Court in the US. And then they had to pay us back for all the nighttime care we paid for. It's just, it's awful sometimes, but we do it because we love them. And all we can do is keep striving and keep trying to get there. So yeah, it's not easy, but if you can explain to people the power of it. But yeah, I had lots of times when teacher would say, I'm not paid for that time. But once they came, they would come again because they saw how powerful it could be. And sometimes they would say, I want to do this for all my students. It's not easy. I can't really answer that.
Danke.
Oh.
Mich würde interessieren, ob
What I would like to know, does Jacob also have friends at eye level, as we say? Because you talk a lot about inclusive schooling and everything that would usually be healthy and normal, say, co-students. And it's been my experience that those fellow students who are friends are rather friends out of, say, social commitment. They like the person with a disability, but it's more their social project why they are happy to engage with him or her. And I can see from my son, when he has friends at his level who also have a certain impairment or disability, that's an entirely different way of being together.
And you see that at this conference, right? Everyone comes together every couple of years and just loves being together. Because Jacob was included from 5 years old, his friends that he had in school are very true friends because they've always been his friends. They came to school, they came to their first year of school, and Jacob was in their classroom, and they never knew that he wasn't supposed to be in there. So he was a part of their growing up. And there are 2 of them in particular that are still in contact, very close with him. Of course, they all moved out of the community, went to college and moved. But they still keep in touch through social media with us. They will come and see him when they're in town. We have a little bit of different setup. I think people in the community know Jacob and will interact with him, and in that way, they're friendly. But Jacob has some autistic-like tendencies, and he's not that interested in socialization. For instance, there's a family here that I was looking at their little son, who's 15 months old, and their son was smiling at me when I talked, and I said, Jacob never did that. He's never had a lot of social interest in other people. So it's not so much of a loss for him. What I like is that the community surrounds him and will support him if he needs it. By the same token, the caregivers that Jacob has are all college students. We have a lot of turnover. So every 3 years, people graduate, we have to hire more, hire more. But they're always college students in the fields of physical therapy, occupational therapy, special education, all the things that they are very interested in getting experience, and it's good for them. And they adore him, and they become his best friends, and he hangs out with them. They take him out to get ice cream and smoothies, and they go shopping with him. Yes, they're paid to be there, but they really love him, and a lot of them come back to see him. I had one couple, a lot of people have gotten married after working with Jacob, meeting their spouse there. And this one couple told me last year when they got married that if anything ever happened to us, they'd take Jacob. They just said, we'd take him, we love him, and he can live with us. I was astounded by that. So they have become natural supports, even though they were paid to begin with. But yes, I totally understand what you're saying. For Jacob, it hasn't mattered because he doesn't socialize or communicate with people in a friendly way very well. I mean, he doesn't have a lot of language. He'll give you a high five, and then even me, I come in the house, I say, "Hi, Jacob." He gives me a high five and pushes me away. So it's like a single gesture. Hold up your hand. It's like this. And I'm his mom. He wants me if it's something he wants. Oh, mom's here, I can get her to get me that. But I'm sort of a tool for him rather than, he knows who I am, and he misses me when I'm gone, but it's not like we have a lot of conversation. He's kind of, he just kind of has that kind of personality, so I can see how it could be very important for other people to have, we love to be with people who have similar experiences, right? I love to be with all of you parents of children with charge because we share experiences. So, it's a really interesting question. I am not against him having friends with disabilities. I just don't want him to be forced into a situation where that's all he has available to him, or that the work is all done in a big group with no choice. If his dreams are that his best friend is someone with charge, or, definitely go for it. Does that answer your question, sort of? You guys are asking me really hard questions.
How often or how regularly do you do this person-centered planning? So at 17 for the first time, but now he's 33, so do you keep checking whatever became of the dreams and objectives last time around? How does that happen?
Well, ideally, if you have a person-centered plan that has objectives in the action plan, you want to revisit those until they've been met. Person-centered planning is typically done at a time of transition. So the first one we had for Jacob was at 5 years old before he entered school. And that's how we had planned for his inclusion in his first year. And then we had another one when he transitioned from what we call primary school to secondary school to talk about what that would look like. And then we had one he was 17 because we were working on getting him his house. And we had all the funding agencies there to talk about how can we, make sure he has the care he needs, the 24/7 care. And luckily we were able to get that through a Medicaid program in the US, so we don't pay for that. And then we had a person-centered plan when the agency tried to take away his nighttime care. And the person-centered plan, which is a part of the agency that serves him, they hold them, talked about how Jacob needs nighttime care, Jacob needs 24/7 assistance, and it was all right there, and they still didn't give it back. They ignored it completely. It was unbelievable. So then we went to court. So every time there's a big transition or something new, we had one this year because we wanted to talk about future guardianship because Tim's 73, I'm 61. We have to talk about who's going to do what. How are we going to deal with Jacob if something happened to us while we're in Germany? Maybe we get in a plane crash. What's going to happen, right? When your child becomes an adult, you start thinking about that more and more, especially if they're more vulnerable like Jacob is, less able to look out for themselves. And so we had a person-centered plan. We had all of his brothers there, and we talked about what can we do to make something happen here. So we typically have done it during transition times. And one of the things that happened in this one is we got extra funding to provide a second lead worker at his home just to do all the paperwork I've been doing for the agencies. I couldn't believe they granted that. I was so surprised. So I'm not working a full-time job and doing all the hiring and all the training and all that. I don't have to do that anymore. Someone else will do it. And that came out of that person-centered plan. That frees up my time. Now I just have to do all the medical things still, but those go on forever, of course. Does that answer your question?
Ja.
More.
Ja, ich hatte auch noch eine.
I have one more.
Macht ihr sowas
So,
auch bei euren anderen?
Do you do the same sort of thing for your other kids? Because as you were talking, I was thinking, well, I should really be doing that for my other kids too, and for myself.
Yeah. I think everyone should have a person-centered plan, especially if you have an issue. Like I said, we did the one for the woman who had a cancer diagnosis. I've been in another one that we did for someone whose husband had just died. That's a transition point, right? You know, who's going to support this woman? How's she going to handle this? And she got all her needs met. I have a son, my youngest son has celiac disease where he can't eat gluten, and he has some low immune system problems. And in a lot of ways, we were talking about this yesterday, I worry a lot more about him than I do Jacob, because he's trying to finish college. And what will he do after college? Am I going to support him for the rest of his life? I can't do that. We're retired, you know. How are we going to manage that? How can I get him in a job that will work for him, that he can work even when he gets sick? So yeah, I think he could use a person-centered plan for sure. It's a great problem-solving opportunity. We use it sometimes. There's one of the types of planning systems we use that's not MAPS, which is the one I showed you, is called PATH. And there's no point in explaining it, but you can use that with agencies to say, what's our goal? What do we need to do? Okay, go back. What do we need to make this happen? And it's a brainstorming process where you can meet the goal and figure out what you're going to do in the next 6 months and the next year. It's just these are amazing processes that just are so open-ended and have a lot of power. But yeah, do it. Just do it.
Ja, ich wollte auch mal euch alle in die Runde fragen.
I wanted to ask just everyone in the room whether you have any experience with this sort of thing. Now, at some point, when school starts up again, we intend to get together with the teachers, probably the head of the boarding school, and hopefully a number of therapists to come together and to have a development planning discussion. That's what it's called here, literal translation. And I rather fear the outcome of that, because so far the meetings that we've had were such that agreements were concluded. We have to work on the sign of the month. There were examples of things that were essential that had to be figured out, and everyone at school, all therapists have to, for instance, work on this sign for wet, for instance, and then they all said, yes, great, we'll do that, and then they said the sign of the month will be oak, because fall is coming. So sometimes you think that it's all about just the teachers patting themselves on the shoulder, on their backs, looking at all the great things they've accomplished. So they'll write things down such as she swims 5
wo man einfach nur mit den Ohren
5 times
schlackert
back
und
and
die
forth in
Lehrer
the
das
pool,
irgendwie
5
schreiben,
lanes,
damit
and
irgendwie
she's
das,
accomplished
was
all
sie
these
am
things,
Plan
but you think it's
geschrieben
just the
haben,
teachers writing this down because they want to show that whatever they had written down in their plans has in fact come true. And I just wanted to hear from other people in the room whether anyone has experienced something like what you're describing here from Michigan, which seems to be quite a paradise.
Vielleicht
No
noch
one?
was in der small.
It's not a paradise. I have had to fight every step of the way for everything. We make our own paradise.
Also für mich hörte sich das gerade auch nicht wie
Well,
Paradies.
it didn't sound too much like paradise at all. It actually sounded exactly like what happened in our case. Our son is called Julian, and in 1999, charge was not known in Germany yet. So
Und dann irgendwann, als er
So
13
at the time, they
Jahre
were
war,
wondering, genetics-wise, does he have it, does it not have it? It was diagnosed at the age of 13. And in many ways, we had experience that are similar to what you described about Michigan. What's your name? I just called you Michigan. we entered the room later. But so he attended a kindergarten for the deaf, and really, eventually, I was shocked to see that none of the teachers were able to use sign language. And as he was looking for a job activity, he spent a year and a half in a place called Neuwied, where they were trying to figure out what would be best for him. And they then put him on gardening, landscaping, in a kitchen, all sorts of different things to figure out what would fit him. And we had these development discussions, as they're called, to see what could he do, what is he interested in, what is he capable of. And what I like very much in your presentation, he too has a very strong will, and he has a clear opinion, and he wants to see things happening that he wants to see happen. And so at first we thought he was vision impaired and then deaf, but he has a lot of other problems. He can't smell properly, he can't taste properly, he has delayed development, puberty-wise there are problems. I don't want to keep going on, but there are quite a few things. And despite these restrictions he has in terms of smelling and tasting things, he opted for the kitchen. He loves to cook. And during his time in Neuwied, he was fairly independent in his room. There was someone who helped him, who was out in the hallway, who could check on him to see whether he was doing okay. So he might have ended up putting a plastic pot on the stove top and triggered the fire alert, but that taught him that that's not something you do. And he came home regularly, and the first time around he brought home his laundry. After that he never did it again because he was proud that he could do his own laundry. And we then, however, found that in many regards he wasn't taken seriously. He also injured himself, and they didn't take care of it, and we really had to fight for him in many regards. And what you said about going to the court, we actually learned sign language. There's a place specifically for parents with deaf parents, and we then went to court and it took 3.5 years because they said he no longer needs the support. Then it was found, yes, he does need it, but then they said, no, he's not intelligent enough for it. But then we said, he is intelligent enough, he needs it. And then they said, no, well, you've already accomplished so much, he doesn't need more help. And eventually, all the years that we ended up having to pay were reimbursed to us retroactively, so we won out. But we supported Julian throughout his life, fighting with the health insurance schemes, with everybody else. That's just how it is. But to go back to the work he does, so when he was through with his time in Neuwied, this location, and I hope no one is here who's affiliated with that, I don't want to offend anyone, but he then had a couple of work experiences with Lebenshilfe, with Fliednerberg, and Diakonie, like a church charity organization. And it was just shameful, really, how they treated him. extra hours they had him put in, how they never paid attention that he can't see when it gets dark, that he can't make it home on his own, that sort of thing. And then he was placed in the labor market. He's now working in a kitchen in a catering firm where they have 2 young people who are in their mid-20s who happen to be very social mindset. And during the first meeting, someone from the local labor agency was there, and she said, well, so Julian, he's not capable of doing this, that, and the other thing. And then I said, well, can we please start by talking about what he is capable of doing? And his boss also said, why, are you here to tell me the things that he can't do, or are you here, to the labor lady, to talk about what he can do? And then, so I spoke with the boss, and we agreed that he'd be given the chance and opportunity. And for the first 2 weeks or so, every other day, the boss ended up sending us photographs of Julian standing in the kitchen with this big wooden spoon. You know, there are these huge cooking units of him making meatballs, of him spicing up things, and what is it called? So yeah, he has structure there, and he does need his routines, and he does there. So he worked on desserts, and he made salads, and they took pictures and said, that's what it needs to look like, and now that's what he was doing. That's what he did every single day until COVID rolled around. He's still there now. He has other tasks now, but they're very social, and he's part of what they're doing there. They're a family. And in fact, when they go on excursions, they take him along, they take care of him, and there are a lot of other things that I would have liked to see happen in these other institutions who actually get paid to do that, and they never even dreamed of doing anything like it. So I'm with you in what you're saying. We too went to court, dealt with the authorities. Everything is a struggle. I bought books for myself, learning about charge, the thing with puberty we hadn't known about, and then we saw, oh, there's another thing to worry about. So Julian is 23 years old now, and still every single day we're learning.
There is no magic. It's all ups and downs. I mean, after 33 years, I can say that. It just, like I heard someone else say this weekend, I don't know if she's here, there's always the next thing that happens. Was that you that said that? That was you, wasn't it? So just when you think Jacob is healthy, he's doing well, he's got his own home, he's 30 years old, then he started having bowel obstructions, which are really dangerous, and having to go to the hospital. One more thing one more doctor, one more specialist, one more agency idiot, you know. But then there are these wonderful things that happen, like this kitchen situation, and yeah. I'm sorry to sound doom and gloom, but especially with a child who's more severely disabled and needs more support, the fight is, all we have. Institutions just aren't built to individualize. Agencies aren't built to individualize, so, yeah.
Thank you.
Ja, habe ich Ton? Ja. Vielen Dank, Nancy.
Thank you very much, Nancy. That was a great presentation, and we've already reached the end of day one. Now, after the end of day one, we'll have dinner from 6 p.m. onwards over there, and the idea is to then have a round of introductions after that here in this room. It'll be brief. If everybody presents themselves and their case history, that would be a bit too long, but it would be nice to just get together for once. And after that, at 7:30, weather permitting, we can make bread on a stick out there. Let's hope the weather holds out. Let's keep our fingers crossed and see you later.